Too late, too late to save him. In vain they tried. These words actually, in relation to the death of Gordon of Khartoum, have been going round my mind in relation to the BBC. Is it too late to save a once great British institution? What has happened is pretty serious and has led to the resignation of the Director General and the head of news, because the BBC essentially created fake news. It misled its audience, it said things that were not true, it left a false impression. And this is really important because the BBC has been accused of bias for many years, of having an essentially metropolitan view of the world, not a party political bias, but a view of the world that it thought was authoritative and it felt it could lecture people about. And it always denied this and said it was impartial and that there was no BBC culture, no monolithic view of the world that it expressed. And these scandals have shown that there is, that it doesn't like Donald Trump, and it's willing to lie about him. It's willing to create an impression that was utterly false because it fed into its overall view of the world. And it was willing to make things up about what had been done by Israeli soldiers in Gaza because of its essentially anti-Israel stance. And what it said about Israel is deeply shocking. It accused Israeli soldiers of creating a mass grave, of murdering people and then burying them, when it had already reported that the self-same grave had been dug by Hamas some time before. It knew its story was false, and yet it broadcast it because it has been unsympathetic to Israel and sympathetic to Hamas throughout the problems that have gone on, the terrible, terrible problems that have gone on, and the brutalities since the 7th of October 2023. So the BBC has been caught out. It's been, as I say, found with its hand in the cookie jar, or as if it were a thief with the safe open, and it's removing the silver that belongs to the owner of the house. And the owner of the house is, of course, us, the British people who pay for it, who fund it. And this is why I wonder whether it's too late that the funding model of the BBC has failed, but the BBC likes it because it's a comfort blanket. It's a secure source of revenue, goes up with inflation every year. They don't need to do any work to get it other than to pretend they've got detector vans going round. But it's been bad for the BBC. The BBC, 30 years ago, was a great and global broadcasting media company. It had a large revenue, it had a global position, it had a global reputation. Through the World Service, it had been highly respected behind the Iron Curtain. Its revenue in 1990, adjusted for inflation, was £3.2 billion. It's gone up since 1990 to £5.3 billion. Sky's revenue in that period, adjusted again for inflation, was about £200 million, £200 million, and has gone up to £10.3 billion, whereas Netflix didn't exist in 1990 and now has revenue of £30 billion. So Sky has gone up 50-fold in real terms, and the BBC hasn't even doubled in that period, while Netflix has gone from 0 to £30 billion. What does this tell you? It tells you that the license fee is not the answer to Auntie's prayers. It has held the BBC back, because in that period, an enormous amount of innovation was going on, which the BBC simply couldn't be part of, because it was limited to getting money from its license fee and some overseas sales of programmes. But the license fee has been at the heart of it. And in that period, the BBC has gone down the rankings as a major media company, because other people have managed to earn more and overtake it. So in 1990, the BBC was still very much the dominant force in sport. But Sky took that away from it. It took the cricket, it took the football, it took the sport that people wanted to watch away, leaving the BBC essentially with sporting events that the owners of the event wanted to be with the BBC for historic reasons. Sky began to dominate that and the revenues flowed from it. The next stage was that Netflix burst onto the scene, and Netflix has been dominating drama and new productions. And it has budgets that the BBC can only dream of because its revenues are so much larger. And admittedly, it's American, its primary market is American. Those revenues are enormous. And the BBC isn't in the game, and it isn't in the game because it's dependent on its license fee, limits its revenue. So what should it do? To show that it isn't too late, to prove what I said at the beginning was wrong, that there is a chance for the BBC to make itself work again. But it's got to get its economics right. And therefore it should go to the government, because the charter is under review, and say we would like to get rid of the licence fee. Not overnight, it can't go to zero income overnight, but say over 10 years. Have it reduced in simple interest terms by 10% a year. They get it past the government, try and get an inflation adjustment so that it goes down by 10% a year in real terms, not just in nominal terms. That would help it a bit. And then get the permission immediately to earn revenue in all sorts of other ways. From tomorrow, it should take advertising on its website. There is no reason not to have adverts on the BBC website, which is a high-quality website that has lots of resources thrown at it, but is simply a cost base for the BBC. Then it should have adverts on its ordinary programming. ITV would squeal, ITV would hate it. But why should ITV have a quasi-monopolistic position in terms of advertising? That's no more reasonable than a licence fee. ITV should have to compete for its supper just as much as the BBC. Advertising would bring in significant amounts of revenue because the BBC still has large audiences for many of its programmes. So it should do that, and then, of course, subscription. The iPlayer is a fantastic service. It's really good. You can find programs that you wanted to watch from years gone by. You can watch a program you've just missed the start of and rewind a few minutes. It's a very good, sophisticated technology that the BBC simply isn't using enough, isn't maximising, it's not sweating the asset. So the BBC should do that. Those are three important revenue sources that it could get: advertising on the internet, advertising on its mainline programmes, and subscription revenue for the iPlayer. But it could change advertising. It could ask Ofcom to change the rules so there could be product placement. The whole network of broadcasting in this country should simply become more commercial. It was different when there were only 2, 3, and 4 broadcasters. You needed constraints and regulations and to try and save people from the bother of product placement and all of that. But none of this is necessary anymore. All these rules should go to allow the broadcasters to be competitive, to have a chance to make money. Doing this little recording, if I wanted to put up a, cup of coffee that I was drinking and tell you that you should only drink this particular brand of coffee, I'd be allowed to do so. Why shouldn't the BBC and ITV be allowed to do so as well? And then the BBC has to look at cutting its costs. This is noticeable whenever you go in to do a broadcast, that the BBC is more staff than any other organisation you go to of a comparable kind. Much more than GB News, much more than Sky. So they need to cut their costs and boost their income at the same point. And the other thing they should do, to try and reconnect with the British people, is mutualise. This was a suggestion made by Kelvin Mackenzie years ago. They should say to the government, look, it's not really owned by the government, owned by the state. It's owned by the licence fee payers. Let's give every licence fee payer one share in the BBC. Let's list it on the stock market. Let's make it a proper public company so that people can have ownership and indeed an asset in return for the licence fee that some people have been paying for years and years and years. Give them ownership, give them a stake. And then perhaps, if it's more commercial, if it's earning its way, if it's cut its costs, perhaps then it can rebuild trust by focusing on doing what historically it used to do quite well, of being rigorously honest and impartial, and not going down the metropolitan highways and byways to lecture us about what we ought to think, to give up that approach. It's going to be a very hard slog, and it's going to be very difficult to rebuild trust after the recent scandal. But it can be done, and people have to stop talking about crazy conspiracy theories. The British state is not clever enough to run these conspiracy theories, whether they're right-wing ones or left-wing ones. There's no conspiracy theory to have got rid of the Director General and the head of news. It's not about that. It's about a failure. And Tim Davie has done the honourable thing, in my view, because the buck stops somewhere and he is the ultimate head of it. He wasn't responsible for the failure, but he's honourably taken responsibility for it. That's how organisations are meant to work. That is a good sign that there are people at the BBC who take their role seriously. It's the people lower down who did it who bear the greater responsibility and ought not to be working for the BBC. They ought to go and work for another broadcasting company that has a left-wing view of the world and is entitled to do so. The BBC has to be impartial because of its history and because of the way it's funded. It has a different duty from other broadcasters. We all have a duty of due impartiality under Ofcom regulations, but that's different from the BBC's very particular national duty that it's clearly lost its way over. But if it were to be commercial, if it were to be owned by the individual licence fee payers, then I think there's a chance it could win back people's trusts, and it could do this rigorously and properly and rebuild a company, rebuild its revenue so that it can compete. May want to do deals with other companies to reinforce its commercial operations. That's how it's going to work. It's a commercial world, and the BBC has been sucking on the teat of state subsidy for far too long, and it's damaged it rather than supported it. It's time for the comfort blanket to go away. It's time for the commercial winds to blow. I think, underneath it all, the BBC can produce great programmes. The iPlayer, it's got very good technology. It could succeed, but it's got to try. As always, thank you for watching.